The old woman's hands were trembling so badly that she nearly dropped her coffee onto the polished wooden floor. Across from her, the young manager stood towering over her, his face red with anger, his finger pointed just inches from her face. Every conversation in the cafe stopped. Every chair seemed to freeze in place. And sitting quietly on the very last stool at the counter, wearing a faded gray hoodie and work boots, was the one man nobody recognized, the owner of the entire cafe chain. What happened next would change dozens of lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness matters more than appearances and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Beyond the Verdict for more emotional and inspiring stories. Malcolm Vance had spent 15 years building one of America's fastest-growing cafe brands, Hearth and Haven Coffee. Born into poverty on the south side of Milwaukee, Malcolm had worked every job imaginable before creating a company that promised something different. Every customer would be treated with dignity, every employee with respect, and every community with compassion. But as the company expanded to hundreds of locations, Malcolm began to worry that the values he had sacrificed everything to build were slowly disappearing. That was why, on a cool Tuesday morning in late October, Malcolm dressed in worn jeans, an old hoodie, and scuffed boots. Without informing anyone at corporate headquarters, he walked into one of his busiest locations in suburban Virginia to see how things truly operated when nobody knew who he was. The cafe buzzed with life. Students typed on laptops. Business professionals discussed meetings over cappuccinos. Families gathered around pastries and hot chocolate. Malcolm smiled quietly as he ordered a simple black coffee and looked for a place to sit. Every table was occupied except for one final stool at the counter. As he sat down, he noticed an elderly black woman carefully making her way toward the same area. She leaned heavily on a wooden cane, her silver hair neatly combed, her lavender sweater worn but spotless. Her name, Malcolm would later learn, was Eloise Harper, and she looked exhausted. Seeing there was only one remaining seat, Malcolm immediately stood and offered her the stool. Eloise hesitated before accepting, thanking him with tired eyes that seemed to carry decades of hardship. Malcolm remained nearby, pretending to check emails on an old phone while observing the cafe around him. At first, everything appeared normal. Then the atmosphere changed. A young assistant manager named Trevor Briggs stormed out from behind the counter, glaring directly at Eloise. Several customers turned as his voice echoed through the cafe. He accused her of occupying space without ordering enough food and questioned whether she belonged there at all. The room grew painfully silent. Malcolm felt his stomach tighten. Eloise's hands began to shake as she reached into her purse, struggling to pull out a crumpled receipt showing she had purchased coffee and breakfast less than 30 minutes earlier. But Trevor barely glanced at it. Instead, he continued speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, embarrassing her in front of dozens of strangers. Then Malcolm heard the words that stopped him cold. Trevor laughed and told another employee that people like her always tried to take advantage of kindness and that customers who looked like her hurt business. For a brief moment, Malcolm couldn't move. Not because he was angry. Because he was heartbroken. He remembered his own grandmother, Sarah Vance, who had raised him after his parents died. He remembered how she had cleaned office buildings at night so he could afford school supplies. He remembered how people had judged her simply because of the color of her skin and the clothes she wore. And now, inside the company he had built to honor her sacrifice, another elderly woman was being humiliated in exactly the same way. The entire cafe waited. Some customers looked away uncomfortably. Others pulled out their phones. Nobody spoke. Until Malcolm slowly stood up. He walked calmly toward Eloise and Trevor. His voice remained steady as he asked Trevor to repeat exactly what he had just said. Trevor scoffed, assuming Malcolm was simply another customer trying to interfere. He dismissed Malcolm rudely and demanded both of them leave. What Trevor didn't realize was that several security executives and regional directors had already entered the cafe moments earlier. They had been desperately searching for Malcolm after discovering he was conducting another unannounced visit. The expressions on their faces said everything. Trevor's confidence vanished. The regional director addressed Malcolm by his full title, founder and chief executive officer of Hearth and Haven Coffee. The silence that followed felt endless. Customers stared in disbelief. Employees covered their mouths. Trevor's face drained of color as he realized the man he had insulted and dismissed was the owner of the company itself. But Malcolm wasn't looking at Trevor. He was looking at Eloise. He gently helped her sit back down and asked if she was all right. For the first time that morning, she began to cry, not because of humiliation, but because someone had finally seen her pain. Malcolm spent the next hour listening to her story. Eloise had been a school teacher for 43 years. She had educated thousands of children, buried her husband after 50 years of marriage, and recently lost her home after overwhelming medical expenses. She visited the café every Tuesday because it reminded her of happier times. That afternoon, Malcolm made a decision that would transform not only one life but an entire company culture. Trevor was immediately terminated following a full investigation. Every employee nationwide would undergo renewed training centered on dignity, empathy, and respect. Malcolm also established the Sarah Vance Scholarship Fund in honor of his grandmother and invited Eloise Harper to serve as its honorary ambassador. 6 months later, Eloise stood beside Malcolm as they opened the fund's first community education center. As cameras flashed and crowds applauded, Malcolm remembered that terrible moment in the cafe when he thought his company's values had disappeared forever. He realized they hadn't disappeared. They simply needed someone brave enough to stand up and defend them. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share this video so more people can hear this message of compassion and human dignity. Special request, comment below with the words, "Kindness still matters," if you believe one act of compassion can change someone's entire life. Because sometimes, the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the most money, the highest title, or the loudest voice. Sometimes, it's simply the person who chooses to care.